Hey everybody, it is Saturday, March 26th, 2001, or no, 2011. Anyway, I wish it was 2001. Start the timer. This is episode 7.4, and I will be changing that next week. I knew I said I'd like the point podcasts, but I'm changing my mind. I'm going to make it A, B, C, D. Not that that really matters, but that's what we're going to do. Anyway, so today I sat down to work on the game project and didn't really get much coding done. And I don't know if you can see me under my hat, but I was inspired for a few ideas, and I started writing them down because there needs to be some definite progress on certain aspects of the game that I hadn't thought of before. And it was only until I started working on stuff that I started coming up with these ideas. Anyway, let's take a look at a document that you might have seen in a previous podcast that I have been adding on to. It shows what I would like to do. So this is kind of stuff that I would like to get done, well, some of it over the next week. We probably won't get to all of it because there's a lot. Anyway, let's take a look at it. Alright, so this is my handy document that I use to write down my ideas and to mark off whether I've actually completed something. As you can see, some of the stuff that I have listed here I've marked off in blue or purple or something, and there's just color coding so that I know that I've done something in some of these areas. If we scroll down, we'll get to some of the new stuff that I've been adding on. All this stuff down here. Some of it I added the other day, some of it I added today, and I will go over each one of those in the 10 to 15 minutes that I have to go over them. So let's go back to the beginning. What I was trying to do today was, what was I trying to do? Oh yeah, I was trying to work on these formulas to calculate damage specifically. And if you look here, I have the method to calculate damage, which is used. Is it calculate damage? No, I'm sorry. It's this one here, determine damage, which sounds kind of like the same thing as calculate damage, but it's a little bit different. Determine damage actually determines the amount of damage to inflict when this method is called, when calculate damage is called. See if we can scroll down a little bit more. Alright, so let's take a look at this. So damage is what we're going to return, and damage is a float. It's basically this formula here, and this formula is a result of what I came up with today. It was a little bit different before I started working on today. It was basically all you see here except for this plus melee weapon upgrade level. But basically what it was is you were multiplying the base weapon damage by some other modifiers like the power-up modifiers or the range damage power-up modifier. But I also wanted to start putting in there strength, which was in there before, but I also wanted to put in the weapon upgrade level. So what I thought was I would just kind of add the strength plus the upgrade level for the melee weapon, and I would get some variable that I would multiply times weapon damage, and then if there were power-ups, multiply those too. Seems good, but it's not. It kind of sucks. It actually really sucks. It really sucks because when you start adding whole numbers together, it starts getting a little out of hand. So, weapon damage, let's say weapon damage was 2, multiply that by strength 2, multiply that by upgrade level, weapon upgrade level by 2, and then it's 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8, and then you multiply it by power up, so it starts getting out of control. Exponentially, I guess you could say. I don't know. Maybe that's not exponentially, but it gets out of control. It starts multiplying by factors too high that I really want. I really want strength, and I really want basically the base weapon damage, this to be the highest value, and then the strength and the melee weapon, upgrade your weapons just by a little bit, so it makes it a little bit better. And when you get to the tail end of your upgrades, then it may be, noticeably much better than you started off with. Seems reasonable, but you can't do that with whole numbers. So why not just substitute in there some float numbers, like 0.1 or something? That gets kind of tricky, because if you multiply the weapon damage, and you make strength 0.1, and you make melee weapon upgrade level 0.1, that's if weapon damage is 2 times 0.1 plus 0.1 is 0.2, so 2 times 0.2 is a fraction of 2, so it's actually less than if it was supposed to be higher, which is what it's supposed to be. So the other thing is I can make it like 1.2. So if strength was 1.2, then it would be whatever the weapon damage is plus a fraction of that. That might be a little bit better. But it's not really obvious in this formula. It's not really obvious what's going to happen. So I think the formula needs to be worked out a little bit better to make, just to make a better formula. And I'm going to have to do some research on that. I really know nothing about the formulas that are used in gaming. I don't. I have no clue. I can make up shit, but what do the guys use in the real world? I would love to find that out. I did a little bit of research, only a couple minutes, but did a quick search on Google and I got this book. I don't even know what it's called. Game Design Workshop. But in here it talks a little bit about Warcraft 2 and some of the things that go into the formula for figuring out how much damage one unit would do over another. This is the kind of stuff that I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to be looking for some definite or some concrete information about what people are using in the industry to generate their formulas. This one's pretty simple. It takes into account some armor, some basic damage, some piercing damage, and then it puts them into a formula where it multiplies it by a chance number. So 50 to 100% chance of, or a 50 to 100% of whatever is calculated is the actual damage. So they would take, in this case, if we zoom in a little bit, I don't know if this is good that I'm showing this on the interwebs because it's copyrighted, but whatever. Their formula is basic damage minus target armor plus piercing damage equals maximum damage, and then they multiply that by a random number between 50% and 100%. Seems a little better than what I got. So I'm going to look into this. And I want to redo all of my formulas. So that's not just this one for damage, but it includes everything. It includes the formula I use to determine the player's speed, or the formula I'm using to determine the rate at which the player can fire, that kind of stuff. Anything that can be modified by the stats that the player is going to be training and the weapon upgrades that the player is going to be upgrading. So that's one of the things I wanted to work on. And that's actually all the way down here at the bottom. So we're starting at the bottom and then going up. Anyway, that kind of what inspired me to start creating some new objectives. Some of the other objectives I want to work on include a level initializer script, so that at the beginning of each level, and I'm going to put that in quotes, a level not being anything specific, but just at every advance, progression that the player is going to go through, this script will take care of, creating or initializing the enemy objects with their stats, determining how often they're going to spawn. In fact, it's all written right here. Well, I don't know why I'm trying to remember them from memory, but want to create a script to use to initialize levels. It should do the following. Instantiate an enemy spawning object. In other words, an object that spawns the enemies with particular data. So we want to know what types of enemies to spawn, what are the properties of those enemies, what are the total number of enemies or enemy waves that are there going to be for each level. Determine the boss and what his properties are and what conditions will spawn the enemy boss, and determine the types of power-ups that are going to be dropped from the enemies when they're dispatched. And I have a very simple flow here, the flow of data. So in other words, an initializer will be where all this data is stored and can be entered by me, the programmer. And then the spawner will get that data and it will use it to spawn enemy prefabs. So the initializer script will pass this on to the spawner, and then the spawner will pass on the relevant data to the prefabs, the enemy prefabs, as they get spawned. And likewise, I want to create a new spawner object. Currently, if we scroll out, let me check my timer. Oh shoot, where's my timer? I've got, I know I started the damn thing. You gotta be kidding me. Didn't start for some reason. Oh wait, I started on my other. There we go. 11 minutes. Oh shoot, I'm over. All right, real quick. So new spawning objects, new spawner objects. In other words, in my scene, I have these objects that simply have a enemy factory script in them, and they spawn enemies, and they have a wait time variable. So every 5 seconds, an enemy will spawn. But the current ones only spawn a certain kind of enemy, and they're pretty static. They don't have any way of changing. I would like the spawners to be more dynamic, so that I can change them so that I only need one spawner, and it knows to spawn multiple different types of enemies. Alright, and what else? we'll do this one last. I want to create new button controllers. Button controllers I showed you over the last 2 days are really sloppy and filled with spaghetti code and duplications of code. I really would like to optimize this and encapsulate as much as possible. It's just, the code that I wrote is really just kind of stopgap measure so that I can see what works and what doesn't work. I really want this code to be much better. And then finally, I want to add a button or a key modifier or a button modifier that will allow the player to inflict melee damage. I don't want melee damage to occur simply because the enemy and the player have collided. I want the enemy to have to kind of like swing their sword to get it to attack the enemies, or to put up their shield. So you'll have one button on the keyboard, like Shift, that will cause the sword to swing when you press one of the arrow keys. Or if you hold down the space bar, your shield will pop up in the direction that you press the arrow keys. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to show you on the controller real quick. Other modifiers, like for the controller, would be the left and right trigger buttons. So if the player is moving around with the left joystick and they're firing with the right joystick, well, they can hold down the right trigger button and push in a direction, and that will instantiate a melee combat swing. Or they can hold down the left trigger and they can move the joystick in a direction they want to block it. Seems pretty simple. And that's about it. It's all the time I have for today. So this has been the mini podcast for Saturday, March 26th. All right, folks. Peace out. Get your gaming on. Have a good day.